I made this video to help you diagnose the trouble codes if you get from a scanner on your car the P0455 or the P0442. You have an evaporation system leak, and the government doesn't like that. They don't like gasoline vapors getting into the atmosphere. So this system is designed, you can see a lot of components, a lot of places for leaks to happen. So this code happens a lot, and in some states it really doesn't matter. In some states they won't let you register your car if you have the engine light on at all. So I live in California, so this becomes a big deal here. People want to make sure there are no leaks in this system. So the way the system works is when the car is stopped and the engine's off and is parked, and maybe you're getting gas, or you're filling gas through the filler pipe, or maybe the tank is just heating up in the parking lot, vapors are going to want to come out. Otherwise pressure will build, and you don't want too much pressure in the fuel tank. So there's a vapor line called the vent line that allows the fuel vapors to come out and be captured inside this charcoal canister. And with the vent valve open, that's the default. Mostly just air is going to come out, and the vapors and the fuel is trapped inside until you start the car and you start driving, and at the opportune time the computer will open this purge valve up here and allow the engine to suck in these vapors out of the charcoal canister and burn them in the engine so they don't escape to the atmosphere. There's also an access port up here that you can use to check for leaks if you have a way to connect to that. I don't. I think it looks kind of like a bicycle valve, bicycle tire valve. I've never connected one, but I think that's how people check the system with the right equipment that I don't have. So I do it the hard way without equipment. Let me explain a little bit more about how the system operates. So in fact, the first thing you should always check is the filler cap itself, because if the filler cap is missing or leaking or not sealed properly, you could get either of the two codes I mentioned, either a gross leak or a small leak. So that's the first thing I always check, and about half the time that is the cause, because that's the one thing people can mess up, right, is not turn their cap tight enough. In some Ford vehicles there actually is no cap. What they have is they have a seal, and I have a case right here. This is a Ford Fiesta 2011, and I don't know if you can see inside there, but there's no cap. There's just a hole with a cover, and there's a seal on that cover. So when you push the filler pipe in from the gas station, it opens the hole, and when you take the filler pipe out, it closes the hole, and it's supposed to seal. But I've heard they sometimes leak and cause that problem. The light comes on. So yeah, so much for Ford getting rid of the filler cap. I don't like that idea. I want to mention now here also, so how does the system test for a leak? I mentioned that while you're driving, this purge valve can open and purge the fuel out. Once it thinks it's done that, once it's purged it long enough and doesn't think it has any vapors left, then it might try to run a test, a leak test. So in GM and in most cars, the way the computer runs a leak test is it will close the vent valve. And this is the only time the vent valve is closed, is during a test, a leak test. Closes that closes up the system except for this purge valve and this cap. So if the cap is on and you open the purge valve, it's going to pull a vacuum because the purge port in the engine is downstream of the throttle, so there's a lot of vacuum there, and it's going to pull a suction on the system. It's going to suck down everything that's in the canister, but then it's going to suck down the whole tank, so the whole tank's going to go into vacuum. And if there's a leak anywhere, it's going to keep on flowing. And the way the test goes is it pulls it down and it reads. There's a pressure sensor on the top of the gas tank usually. It tells it that it's got a vacuum, and so then it closes the purge valve, and then it watches the data on that pressure sensor. And if after the purge valve is closed, the system should be stable. There should be nothing, no pressure changes at all. If the pressure goes up, well, it's supposed to be vacuum. That means air is getting in somewhere. The pressure is going up. It's no longer a vacuum, or not as much of a vacuum as you had before. And could be going in through that filler pipe. It could be going in through a leak in the seal of the fuel pump on top. That's unlikely. It could be the vent valve is not properly closed. It could be the purge valve is not properly closed. In those cases, you might get an additional trouble code. And if you get one of those codes, let me pause for. Okay, if the vent valve is not functioning, you might get the code P0443. If the purge valve is not closing properly, you could get the code P0446. And you might want to test those valves, but first I'm going to tell you how to do your own little leak test. If you go to a shop, what they're going to do is they're probably going to open this port and they're going to blow smoke in there, and smoke's going to go through the whole system, and wherever the smoke comes out is where they find the leak, and then they identify those components, replace them, and seal up the leak. If you don't have a smoke machine, then you're going to do what I do, and you're going to take this vent valve off of the canister here, or I'm sorry, the vent line. And if you blow into the vent line this way, you're testing whether there's a leak somewhere in the tank, or perhaps there's a leak in the filler pipe. That's all you're really checking if you're blowing in that direction. If you blow into the charcoal filter, you're checking to see if there's maybe a crack in the canister, or this vent valve's not closing, or this purge valve is not closing properly. If you blow in and the pressure doesn't stabilize and air keeps on going in from your lungs into the system, it's going somewhere and there's a leak. If you think maybe it's the purge valve because you don't see any leaks over here, then you can take the purge valve off of the canister and blow directly into the purge valve, and then you're checking just the purge valve and the purge line and this little access port. If any of that's leaking, you'll be able to identify that by the air flowing from your lungs through that little tube and all the way up to the engine. Now, sometimes this vent valve is all the way up at the engine too. I know in Lexus they do it that way. They vent it into the air cleaner. That's not the case in most cars. You can usually plug the vent valve from the back of the car. I'm going to show you the back of the car, an example here on this Fiesta, what the canister looks like. So there's a canister. It's got charcoal in it. It's mounted in the back of the car usually, and you can see there are 3 lines connected. One is going to be the vent line that goes to the tank. One is going to be the purge line that goes to the engine. And one is going to be the venting that goes to the vent valve. So those are the same 3 lines that you saw in my little picture that I drew. And so I would get under here, and I would pull that pull this line loose first, and I would blow in both directions and see if air is going through. But first I need to plug the vent valve when I'm blowing into this canister. Otherwise it's just going to go straight out the vent valve, and that's what it's supposed to do, because that's the default, is the vent valve is open. So you need to plug that on the other side before you blow in, and then you'll be checking the canister, and you'll also be checking the purge line and valve, because the air can go into the canister and out the purge line towards the front of the engine. If the purge valve is properly closed, everything should seal up, and when you blow in and you're holding the vent valve, you should feel pressure, and your lungs should not be able to push beyond a certain point. But if it keeps on going, you know you've got a leak. So that's kind of what it looks like underneath. The other way is to blow back this way into that hose, and that goes up into the fuel tank, and then that will pressurize the fuel tank. And you could listen, or you could have somebody else listen at the filler cap to see maybe if the filler cap is hissing air as you blow into it. These are some approaches to take, but it's a tough job, to say the least, because you've got to check all these things. Now, there's one thing I didn't talk about yet in my picture, and that is, in some cars, specifically Chryslers, and I know BMW also does this, and Chryslers and Jeeps. Try to get this to focus a little better. There's an air pump. And to run the test, instead of pulling a vacuum by opening the purge valve, the computer closes both the purge valve and the vent valve, and it activates this pump. And this pump, instead of pulling a suction, it actually pressurizes the tank. And again, you're watching the pressure sensor the whole time, the computer is, and it's watches as it builds pressure, and only a couple psi is all it needs, really. And once it reaches a certain point, it stops, and then it watches. And if the pressure decreases a lot, then it's going to say, well, there's a big leak, and it's going to set that first code I mentioned. It's here, the P0455. On the other hand, if it's a small leak, the pressure only decreases a little bit in time, then it's going to set the code P0442. I'm reading from my notes here that you can see if you want. Maybe I can somehow post my notes. It's going to be hard for you to read, so I'll try to post them for you. Anyway, in those cars, they pressurize, and so what that does is it creates another possible place for the system to leak. So when it runs the test, it might be that this line here trying to pressurize your tank is actually leaking, or it might be that the pump itself is not developing enough pressure. So there could be a problem with the pump itself. They add another component that can cause the failure. That's why I don't like those kinds of cars, but that's another subject, really. So this is the evap system and this is how I go about troubleshooting the evap system. Please, if you have questions, post them and I'll try to answer everything I can. Thanks for watching.